I am a trustee and the Vice President of the Emsworth Maritime and Historical Trust. That we are now able to celebrate 25 years since the museum was first opened is just part the way along what has been the original inception of the Trust, which started in about 1974, and at the instigation of David Rudkin, a meeting was held in Admiral Gick's offices in 1974, at which 22 people attended, in order to try and decide what could be done about Echo 2, the hulk in the harbour, which was rapidly disintegrating, and it was hoped that we could restore this if at all possible. Now, I believe that I am now the only surviving member of the original trust that was formed, the Emsworth Maritime Trust. Subsequently, it was discovered that however much we may have wished to keep Echo 2, it was too far gone, and it was becoming difficult to navigate round it in the harbour. And in fact, pieces were falling off it, with the result that it was a danger to the shipping, particularly the yachts that were going into the Emsworth Yacht Harbour. Instead, it was decided that the future objects of the Trust would be to try and preserve as many historical objects and situations that had occurred in Emsworth itself, as well as any maritime things that could still be of interest and had taken place in Emsworth. What in fact horrified us was quite a number of elderly people, when they died, had no immediate relatives, and many photographs and many experiences that they had, having lived in Emsworth for most of their lives, were being lost. And then what even horrified us more was one day Michael Kennett was walking down Queen Street and noticed that there was a skip outside one of the solicitors' firms in Emsworth, and in the skip were just masses of deeds, old deeds. Because by then it was no longer necessary to keep deeds, because land was being registered at the land registry instead, and that was the means of identifying who owned properties in the future. So we decided that we needed to keep as many of these objects as we possibly could, but we didn't have any premises to keep them in, so they were being held, objects and photographs were being held in existing members' garages, spare rooms, and what else have you. And obviously what we really needed was museum premises, but where on earth could we get them? In those days, the committee meetings were invariably held in David Rudkin's house in Ellesmere Orchard, and he'd approached the Emsworth, the Hampshire Museum Service to see if they could give us any advice and help in possibly setting up a museum. So lo and behold, one winter's evening, a gentleman came down from the Hampshire Museum Services and said, "Well, I don't think I'll be able to help you very much. What have you really got in mind?" And we said, "Well, we'd like to be able to set up a museum in Emsworth." "Oh dear, you must be out of your silly minds, mustn't you? I mean, what on earth do you want to think you're going to do that? You've got a museum in Havant, That should be satisfactory to house all the things that you want to preserve relating to Emsworth. Oh, you haven't got a hope in hell of starting up a museum. Really, gentlemen, there's nothing else I can really say, so I will bid you good night. And out he walked. Well, we were just struck dumb. But as a result of that, I think more than anything else we said, right, we'll show him. We'll show him. We'll jolly well get somewhere that we'll be able to put on exhibitions. And indeed we did initially put on, I think, 2 exhibitions in the South Street Day Centre. And then in about 1987, we learnt through the grapevine that Havant Council had decided that there appeared to be a surplus of public halls available for use in Emsworth, and they were going to reduce them. And they decided that the public hall above the fire station in North Street was surplus to the needs of the local community, and therefore it would become vacant. And obviously they wanted to find somebody to take it over and look after it. So we approached the council and they said, well, yes, you can come along and see, I think it was something like the Ways and Means Committee of the council, and if you can show us that you can make a viable and satisfactory go of setting up a museum there, well then we will very happily put your proposals to the full council meeting and with our blessing, and ask if they would approve to let you have the use of the premises. So I went along, and so did Michael Kennett and David Rudkin, and we met the Ways and Means Committee, who sort of, well, it was a bit like these committee meetings in the Houses of Parliament, where you're sort of grilled like nobody's business. How do you think you're going to do this? Where have you got the money from? And so on and so forth. And we got out a little budget which showed that even allowing for contingencies of £375 a year, we reckon that we could initially start up a museum with £1,500. And that was in 1978. The full committee of the council agreed that yes, they would let us have the use of the premises and that they would draw up a lease granting us permission to have it for, I forget how many years initially, 3 years I think it was, and we could have it at a peppercorn rent, which meant we paid no rent at all actually. So then we really had to put our heads together, because there was going to be an awful lot of work to do to try and get the building up together. It wasn't in an awfully good state of repair internally anyway, and we discovered, I think it was us that discovered, that there was asbestos in the building. And initially the council said, well, we would be responsible for removing the asbestos, which was going to be about £600 or £700. And at that time, Councillor Mrs. Dane said, well, no, I'm not sure this is really right. I think you ought to object to that and ask the council if they would cover the costs of removing the asbestos, because obviously the building couldn't be taken on by us if there was still asbestos there. It was a hazard. So anyway, yes, the council had second thoughts and they decided to remove, at their expense, the asbestos. So then we hoped that we'd be able to open the museum sometime by about March or April 1988. But because of various delays in getting the building up together, decorating it and so on, it wasn't until July that we were in fact ready to go ahead. So it was all hands to the pump, and indeed with so few financial resources, everybody mucked in and did painting, cleaning, and what else have you, and then we had to decide who we were going to ask, which local dignitary we were going to ask to come along and officially open the museum for us. And as it happened, Michael Kennett, who'd been chairman of the subcommittee organising all of this, getting the museum ready to open, said, well, he had contacts with Stansted House, and he would approach Lord Besborough to see whether or not he'd be prepared to come along and open the museum. And if he was prepared to do so, it would be very much a question of when he would be available, because that would depend on when the official opening could take place. So anyway, Lord Besborough was approached, and he said yes, he could certainly welcome the opportunity to come and open the museum for us, and that he would be available on the 29th of July, that evening. He would arrive together with Lady Besborough, and we would invite some of the local representatives of other organisations and the Mayor of Havant, and for that purpose we got the council to agree to make free parking spaces for Lord Besborough and for the Mayor's cars, and they were the only two that were allowed in that little car park there by the museum. And I knew that the Royal Marines Museum were getting rid of 5 old display cases that they no longer needed in their own museum at Eastney. And so I approached the colonel in charge there and asked if we could have these showcases, and to which he agreed at no cost at all, provided we arranged to transport them from Eastney back to Emsworth here. And so we obtained those. Then it was also a question of how were we going to record all the exhibits that were given to us, because we needed to have a proper record of them. And if indeed some items were only going to be loaned to the museum, we also need to have a record of those and to be able to give a proper receipt to the person who owned them. And again, I prevailed upon the administrators in the Royal Marines Museum, who very kindly showed me all their papers that they used for all their exhibits and recording of them. And they gave me copies of those, and that's what we initially used. We copied the Royal Marines' ways of doing things. Well, such was the amount of detail that we had to go into in the final stages before the museum was opened, as to who was going to get the floral displays, the floral gifts for Lady Besborough, who was going to order the wine that we were going to have there, and including how long were we going to allow the chairman to speak when he introduced Lord Besborough. Well, that was 5 minutes and no more. Lord Besborough could talk for 4 minutes and no more, and that would be it. And at that official opening, only invited people were attending, the members of the trust didn't in fact go and look at the museum until the following day, the Saturday. Yeah. Otherwise it would have been all too crowded, because the actual ceremony took place up on the top landing there, which is quite small, and so you couldn't have too many people around anyway. So that's what happened, and lo and behold, Lord Besborough came and said he was delighted to be opening the museum, as he'd always regarded Emsworth as his home port.
My husband went along today when David Rudkin asked him to go along. He started a meeting, and he came home and said, we want to form the Emsworth Maritime Trust. Yeah. He said, they will want a secretary, and I've said you'll do it. So that was how I got involved originally.
Oh, right.
And then we had the proper inaugural meeting, which was, as far as I remember, held over at the Yacht Harbour in Admiral Gick's office.
Yeah.
He said he'd lend the office to us. And we went there for our committee meetings for quite a long time after that. One night we got locked out, so we had to have the meeting on the balcony. And then eventually we ended up having the meetings in David Rudkin's house. In Westbourne, yeah. yes, over in Westbourne. And that's about it really. We went on, and then after 6 years I decided that it was getting a bit much, because at this time I'd taken up a course at Highbury to become a medical secretary, medical receptionist rather. And I was able to use my new typing skills, because I didn't know about typing before. I'd never done any, but I used my typing skills to do the minutes of the Maritime Trust. And then Dorothy Bone. Well, first of all there was what was his name? No. Somebody who died very quickly after he became secretary. It's all in the notes. I've just forgotten the name for the moment. And then Dorothy Bone rang me up and said she'd been asked if she'd like to, and I said, well, it's very time-consuming. I didn't encourage her, but what a wonderful job she's made of it all these years.
Yes, she's done very well.
There's not a lot more that I can tell you, I don't think.
But you have kept working for the museum.
Well, yes, oh my word, yes, when we opened it, I used to go in with Angela Morley, I think her name was. We used to clean the place up on Saturday mornings, ready for the opening over the weekend. And then I did stewarding very regularly throughout the whole of the time when it was open. And went on a lot of the outings that were arranged. I was on the fundraising committee for a little while, and the name is gone again, who ran the outings, and his wife from Westbourne.
Eddie Lewis.
Eddie Lewis. We had some very good outings, thoroughly enjoyable. Always managed to get, we called it Eddie's wet weather, because it was always a fine day.
Well, it was back in about 1984. I was about to retire, and we'd been doing a lot of documentary research on Chichester for years while we did archaeology, and we thought it would be sensible, in fact silly not to do some on Emsworth, as we'd have more time. and I got in touch with David Rudkin as to make sure that nobody in his area was doing it as well, so that we'd be duplicating. And anyway, he came round with Jack Barrett one day, and we discussed it a lot, and he said, oh yes, we would very much like you to do research for us as well as for yourselves. So soon after that, we were appointed archivists to the Trust, and that's how it all started. The point was, of course, about the location for the museum was that David Rudkin would have loved to have had somewhere in the centre of Emsworth or down by the quay for the museum and on the ground floor. Well, there just wasn't anything, and of course it would have been very expensive anyway. It wouldn't have had the space. At about that time, the flat above the fire station was being vacated by the Farnham family, and the council were having difficulty in finding a use for it. They used to let it out for dancing classes in an evening, and we get about one letting a week. And about that time, Tessa Daines and one of the other councillors became aware of what the museum was wanting to do, or at least we wanted to set up a museum. And eventually, of course, the two ideas came together and we were offered the location, and that's how it started. And eventually we got some furniture and equipment from the Royal Marine Museum, I think it was.
I think they provided bookcases.
They provided cases, that sort of thing. So we had something to start with. People had got all sorts of things in their lofts and garages, so there was a fair amount of stuff to equip the museum when we opened, and that's how it really was beginning to start.
My memories of the beginning of the museum are of a lot of interested people who'd got great enthusiasm for the museum, but there was no money, and everybody was going round with literally donating what they could, not necessarily of money, but of equipment and other things. There was no question of stationery much at all, or any other things that we take for granted these days with the museum. The people who donated their goods, they were all displayed in the showcases. The labels were handwritten as the things came in, and then towards when we were going to have the official opening, it was decided that they would be better if all the labels were the same. So I volunteered to type them, and I do remember that it was a last-minute job, and as usual, panic. And I can remember now going around putting labels in about an hour before the museum was actually opened officially by Lord Bessborough. That was my main reason, my main memory of the day of the opening of the museum.
Well, it must have been before 2000, because I started doing the rotas in 2000, but I got involved because Mum was very much involved with the museum, and she sort of got me going down to do stewarding, which I did enjoy. I mean, she was very keen, and sort of after she died, I just carried on, and then Pam decided she didn't want to do the stewardess list anymore, and sort of asked me, would you like to do it? And I sort of said, yes. Not sure why, but I did. And I think I must have done it for over 6 years, I think it must have been. Then I wasn't so well, so I was finding it difficult to sort of cope with it all. And I think Pam took over a bit again, and then the new Joyce and Linda, yeah, get it right, took over. But we still sort of do the stewards, and then I got Brian involved, coming up and steward with me, and he's very good because he knows a lot about Emsworth, and people like to talk to him, and he can give them a lot of information. But I find it very interesting. It's just
It's sad that I haven't been able to do as much as what I probably would have liked.
Well, it was, well, very early days. In the beginning, because, you know, I was working for the lifeboat and the museum was, and we knew all the people, you see, Monica, and we came up, and then when Gordon's father died in 1983 or two, we had his models and various old things which the family decided should come to the museum to be looked after. And so that's how it first happened. And we brought the models and a walking stick you have, which when he was away in the war, he came home, he made a walking stick out of all the love letters from his wife. The First World War, of course. And so that went. And then I just learned this morning, he did a model of the Sylvia, which he thought that the girls thought to go to the church, and they gave it to St James's Church, which they had hanging up a few years from the rafters. Well, then on one occasion they went to church and didn't see the Sylvia, the boat. So they inquired, and lo and behold, they thought that was better to go to the museum than hanging up out of sight there. So you've got them all now. And that was our first, really, and we used to go and, you know, look at things. But then when disability took over for Gordon quite a long while ago, then, you know, we couldn't do so much. But it's wonderful to have the newsletter and to see what all you wonderful people are doing. And I have hoped, but of course he's had so many falls lately and at the time, but what I am doing, I've started a little bit, is to give the story of how we started years ago at the Dolphin Quay to build the folk boats and the other boats. That was, we went down there and about 1948-9, from then on, and that's how we started there with the first chandlery shop in Emsworth, which I managed. And so that is something I'm hoping to get up together. We've got photographs, and I expect you know Graham and Muriel Dryden. They come, they're very interested, and Graham is going to help me copy photographs. So if I could get a little story and then photographs and little captions of when they were all built, that's a good history of Emsworth.